Well, so the introduction, I guess, would be then again that I was elected or appointed actually in 2014 unanimously, and have been reelected twice to office. My motivation really was, my upbringing, being homeless. I was fortunate enough to go back to Notre Dame after being a Washington State Scholar here. After graduating from business school there at Notre Dame with a business and technology degree, I went back to Silicon Valley. And long story short, I ended up moving back up here. My wife and I are looking at starting a family. We move into the Gig Harbor area, and it dawns on me, most of my friends are still living in poverty, low income. That's frustrating. When you do enough to kind of scratch and claw your own way out of poverty, you ideally would like to look around and see a lot of your friends with you. And okay, so fast forward, I'm trying to build my career. We're starting to have kids, and it starts to dawn on me, you know what, I can, through my own sweat equity, pretty much guarantee that my kids won't go through the poverty that I went through, and can set them up on a pathway to, kind of maybe forever change their stars. And so they won't know about that poverty, and they'll have successful options. But what about my grandkids? I mean, at some point in life, everyone starts to think about legacy, and I started to think about those things. The answer that I got was, well, okay, maybe if I work a little bit harder, maybe I can affect my grandkids. But what about my great-grandkids? And then by extension, you start to look out at extended family or friends. That was the motivation. I said, you know what, I have a skill set. I think I can purvey it over into the political realm, and maybe I can do a little bit more and have a broader impact of an effect rather than just on my own kids. That was the motivation that got me to pull the trigger, if you will, to take a risk in my private sector career and run for office. Since I've been in, I think I've answered a question that was really on my heart at the time, and that is, I know what I've done in my private sector career. I think those skill sets will translate over to politics, but will they? I don't know. The people gave me an opportunity to prove that, and I think I've shown that they have. I've done some things for this district that people said could not be done. I've made promises. I'm one of the few candidates. I've taken my corporate experience that spans the globe in a lot of different industries, and one of the things that you learn that you have to do in order to be successful is you have to put measurable goals out there. What gets measured gets done. I'm used to doing that. I'm used to the stress that comes with it. I'm used to the burden that comes with it, because if you state put out a measurable goal and you don't hit it, then everybody can point to it and say, yeah, you didn't really hit that. That's why politicians are remiss from doing it. They don't want to do that. They want to speak in canned phrases that sound good to everybody, but you really can't pin them down to whether or not they were ultimately successful or not. I've bucked that trend. Obviously, the biggest one that I've done is saying that I would stop the tolls from going up on the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. And I said that I would do that when I first got into office, and I've kept that pledge. I stopped them up from going up in 2016. I stopped them from going up in 2017 with short-term fixes, all the while saying that I'm going to work on a long-term fix that would refinance the bridge. And those of you that have been around here long enough have heard every legislator that's been in this seat or been in this district that have preceded me all said you cannot refinance the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. Everybody said that. You can see it. It's on record. It's in your papers. And that's what I was able to do this year. That's the biggest accomplishment that I would let people know about, is we refinanced the bridge this year with an $85 million loan that is virtually free. There's no interest payments on it. Let me ask you, would you like an $85 million loan with zero interest? Oh, and here's a better term. You have to make no payments on it until it's due. That saves this district over $200 million in compound interest. That stops the tolls from going up $1 this year. It stops them from going up $1 next year. It stops them from ever hitting the worst case scenario, which was double-digit tolls, which is one of the things that Senator Angel was very concerned about. Is that if you looked at the different range of estimates that the Transportation Commission had, we could potentially have seen $10 tolls. Not anymore. And on top of that, so no longer are people going to have to worry about the variable rates of tolls going up. They'll be able to afford their commute. They're going to keep that money in their pocket, which will help them make their ends meet at the end of the month. It's guaranteed now that the tolls are going to come off the bridge when this debt's done. That's the other thing I secured in that. It's a huge win for the district. And so, yeah, I think that the skill sets that I had to ask myself, would they translate over? I think I can say that they did. And I want to continue doing that work. I think that I lend a unique skill set to the people of this district. Certainly there's very few people with my knowledge of IT with my knowledge of industries that are relevant for the growth of our job opportunities for our kids and grandkids. I have that. I'm one of the acknowledged experts in Olympia on that. I'm given a lot of latitude and asked to put my knowledge on a lot of topics down there that don't necessarily lend themselves to 30-second sound bites that you would see in the news. A lot of people, I mean, you know what those topics that I work on are really good for? They're good at helping cure insomnia, because they're boring sometimes. But if you want somebody that can protect your individual liberties in terms of biometric identifiers or personally identifiable information being transmitted and sold without your knowledge on the web, those are things that I'm leading the efforts on at the state level, and Washington State really is at the forefront in the nation on those issues. So those are things that I'm also doing. They just don't necessarily make the news because they're not quote-unquote sexy tidbits of information. So I think that I can honestly look at people in the eye and tell them I've done a good job. I'm a good bipartisan, hard-working legislator for you. And if you put me back and if you want me to continue to do this, I'm happy to do so.
One of the things we've been talking about, because it's an issue in this district, is a very unique thing that there's a Republican challenger to a two-term incumbent.
Yeah.
A, why do you think it is? And B, how does that change your approach to this campaign at all?
Well, it's not unique, actually. If you go back and look, I've never not had a primary challenger, believe it or not.
From your own party? Have you had
that? I've always had a challenger. This district is unique. If you go back and you look at the trends of the 26th district prior to the 2016 race, which kind of, I mean, that was such a big whipped up of a frenzy of a race. Every district in the state had very massive voter turnout. But prior to that, if you look at the trends that the state had relatively fallen into, the 26th district is basically the highest voter turnout or voter engaged district in the state. I've probably said that to you guys before. So this district demands a lot from their legislators. They want a high value output. And so I've known nothing but challengers. I've always had a Republican challenger. You can go back and look in 14, you can look at, well heck, even for the appointment process, there were 7 people. I think it was 7 people back in 2014 or 13 that were running for the appointment, and then I immediately got a primary challenger in 2014 and had another one again in 2016, and so I have one again. It's par for the course. I don't mind having challengers because it keeps you on your toes. I think any legislator that starts to get lackadaisical or thinks that they can maybe dial it in is ready to move on.
Do you think you're ideologically much different than the other Republican in the
I've heard her articulate no real points of difference of my platform.
Okay. Just an experience,
well,
kind of qualification thing. Let me ask you the question about the thing that does unfortunately get in the news. It has to do with a couple of years ago there was some disciplinary action regarding the work environment and then the PDC's ethics complaint. How do you respond?
Not the PDC. I've never had a PDC ethics complaint.
Oh, sorry.
Both ethics.
I misspoke. How do you respond to those, and what have you done corrective action-wise since then? Sure.
Okay, so the first thing that people need to know is that there's never been a formal disciplinary action taken against me. There was a leaked letter that was leaked back in 2017 in January, and that leaked letter said that they weren't going to let me have my legislative staff. Well, first off, and my opponents have claimed that I don't have staff. That's untrue. I do have staff. I still have my PIO, my public information officer. I still have all my committee staffers. I've never been without staff. I've never not been without staff. Okay, so now we've got my legislative aid.
Was there a restriction on how you worked with staff or office?
Well, they said that they wouldn't let me hire a new one unless I agreed to certain terms. I won't agree to those terms. Those terms want me to say that I have created a hostile work environment. And the debate at the time was, I said I have never created a hostile work environment. I don't have a hostile work environment. Therefore, I'm not going to sign this document. And the gist of what was put out was, hey, well, if you just go along with this, then, you know, and this is one of the things that you guys were, as a paper, were against the anti-transparency bills that they tried to put forward. Well, this is what was pitched to me. Jesse, you know, if you just sign this document, it goes away. It never goes to the public eye. Except that I'm not that type of person. I'm not going to sign something if it's not true. And it was not true. So what happens? I get a lawyer involved, and then 2 days later it's illegally leaked. It's not a formal document, by the way. They have to confirm that. It's not a formal document. Okay, so I don't have staff. They want me to do this. Now what did they do? What you guys were unaware of until October of last year was that they immediately put me into an independent investigation through the ethics board. First legislator that's ever had that done to them. 10 months, thousands of dollars subpoena all my records. And what did that ethics board come back? They looked at 3 things. If you look at the letter that was leaked, they referenced the hostility, and then they said there were two other things that might get looked at by the ethics board. Well, those things were, there was a claim made that I had sold my vote, and there was a claim made that I had forced my legislative aide to do campaign work on legislative time. So that's what they looked at. And what did they come back with after a 10-month investigation? Nada. Not a thing. They went through thousands and thousands of emails, texts, phone records, everything. So they came back, and is there anything in their ethical finding at all about hostility? No, because there was none. If you go and contrast this, for example, say to the investigation that the legislature is doing right now to Representative Sawyer in Tacoma. There have been some articles in the Tribune about it. Go look at that and look at what the chief clerk's office has done. They have issued dozens of documents about what they've done with their investigation. They've done this, they've dotted this I, they've crossed that T, and therefore now, as a result, they're sending it over to the ethics board. I dare you to find any of those documentations, any of that investigation done on me, because it was never done. They send it over to the ethics board, and the ethics board comes back, and in their report in October, there's nothing about hostility, because they couldn't find anything. As a statement of fact, I run a very good office. Okay? All that was referenced in these news articles were anonymous sources. Well, they went and investigated them all for 10 months and thousands of dollars. By the way, that board, that investigative board, 7 Democrats, 2 Republicans. 5 of them are appointed by the governor, and then the legislative bodies each appoint 1 member, so that's where you get your 2 Republicans, and then that's where you get your 2 Democrats from the legislature, from the Democrat caucuses. And then you've got 5, and of the governor's appointees on there, those are former Democrat, most of them, except for a couple judges, those are former Democrat caucus leadership. And then if you look at the staff that makes up the ethics board, those are former Democratic lawyers, Democrat caucus lawyers that were paid by Democrat caucus. That's what was investigating me. They weren't going to give me a softball for anything. And they came back and couldn't find anything on hostility. Well, that's a problem now for the clerk's office. They have no documentation. They never did any investigatory work, yet they came out and preemptively made this case. Now, the problem with the clerk's office was that, and what nobody knows, is that the former chief clerk had just retired. A new one came on, and he was thrown this thing, and so he just immediately makes these decisions, trusting that the information and the stuff done by the previous administration was done right. So he's in a tough spot. So now what happens? If he gives my staff back, because there's no evidence at all, and in fact now they've done the investigation and found that it didn't occur, if he gives it back, they're worried that I'm going to sue them. So what do? Well, I could sue right now, but I have a campaign to run.
Your staff members, you mean?
They could give me back my legislative aid. Yeah, they could let me rehire another legislative aide. But now I've come back and said, look, the investigation proved that there's no hostility. The investigation proved that I run a clean office. Okay. Now under that notion, give me my staff back. Well, you know, now they haven't told me they're worried about me suing them, but that's what my lawyers are telling me. So this will get adjudicated after the election's over, because I'm going to win re-election because I work hard and I'd still delivered. Think about this. Even without my staffer, I still brought home the biggest win for this district that any legislator has ever done. Nobody can claim to have accomplished what I've accomplished in my time in office, and I did it without staff. That's how hard I worked for this district. Now, so that's the first thing that the ethics board came back with. There's nothing in there also about selling my vote, because it never happened. I'm one of the few guys that stands up to corporations, and I get beat up all the time for standing up to corporations. I don't sell my vote. If I sold my vote, I'd probably be in leadership right now, because I'm an independent voice. You know, I haven't taken the easy road to election. So from that standpoint, so they come back, and now I'm vindicated on that charge too. So now 2 out of 3 charges that were lobbied against me have been proven to be false. Well, so now what do they do about the 3rd one? Okay, so they go through and they look through thousands of emails, thousands of texts. And they say that they found about 20 out of thousands that maybe could have hinted that there was, that I asked her to go look at a sign, or I did something like this. Okay. But then they say, we're going to stipulate that we don't want to prosecute you on this. We just kind of want this to go away. But here's what we did find, Jesse. We found that over the course of over a year that your legislative staffer worked for you, that 2 times, so keep in mind, she's showing up 5 days a week, 365 days a year basically, 2 times, oh, by the way, you weren't in office because I was out down in California working my job, but 2 times during lunch, she popped open her personal laptop and connected to Facebook, her own Facebook, on her own time. But she connected to Facebook, so we're going to fine you $1,000. Why? Because the Wi-Fi that she connected to, I got reimbursed for. That's why I got fined $1,000. No, I would love the media to really write a real story about that and then go digging. It's one of the reasons why I've also been one of the biggest advocates for transparency, especially for media transparency, because I know they have nothing there. Eventually I will be vindicated from this, and I will have my staff back, but I will never sign a document that's untrue because they're trying to put political pressure on me. And I trust the voters of this district see through it.
Let me ask a question about that.
Yeah.
And again, I'm an independent.
Sure.
You know, I'm not in your district, and that. So you mentioned the board or whoever sent the Democrats to, or
Yeah.
whatever on that. So I'm just wondering then. So and I'm sure you repeated what you said here many times. Explain yourself. I'm sure you have. So what's your theory? Why you? If you're saying that what assuming what you're saying is true, I don't know one way or another than that. I'm sitting here wondering, then why go after you? What is it about? What is it about that? I mean, I'm just wondering. What? Maybe you can answer. I don't have a clue, but maybe you can answer that question.
Well, if I could read their minds, I would be
Sure.
rich, right?
Fair enough.
But I can give you a couple of
Sure.
facts that maybe allows you to answer that.
Okay.
First off, since I've been put into office, appointed, the Democrat Party has spent more money against me than any other representative in the state trying to unseat. This was once a solidly blue district. You had Representative Kilmer, you had Representative Sequist, you had Angel come in, but before her you had Pat Lance. Okay, and so they come in, and when I came in, and you've been around long enough, everybody knew the notion was, oh my gosh, the Republicans really screwed up. They appointed this guy named Jesse, and he's really conservative. This district won't elect him. And then so then what do? They run Nathan Schlicker against me. He's a smart guy, right? I remember you still did the dual ones back there.
Yeah, I remember.
Sharp guy. I'm a sharp guy too, though. The district chose me. They spent a lot of money. They had out-of-state money coming in. They went all over the place. And then they come back and they do the same thing with Larry, and my numbers have grown. And I think they're frustrated. They want the seat back. We are one seat down in the House of Legislators, or House of Representatives. One seat down. If we take back one net seat, the Republicans share the gavel. If we take back two, then we have the gavel solely. So every seat has a major impact on the potential balance of power in this state. And you're looking at a guy that has been their #1 target for years.
I guess that's my question then. But I mean, if it's I understand the split legislature. But again, why are they picking on you? You say because it's been traditionally a democratically held seat, so they went after you?
Well, they have. Well, see, again, I'm telling you factual stuff. I don't want someone coming in saying that I'm slandering them.
Sure.
Because you're asking me to try to understand what their motives are, and what I'm doing is I'm laying out things that I can look at and say, well, maybe that seems to be reasonable, and so I'm trying to give you a fair answer. I'm not trying to dodge it at all, but they have factually spent more money against me than anybody. Let's see. They can't claim that I'm not bipartisan because all of my major wins, even the bridge fix bill, even all the major environmental policy in this state has been a partnership between me and Democrats, right? So they can't say I'm not bipartisan. They can't say that I'm not smart. They can't say that I don't work hard. I mean, there's no real way to assail me. So maybe their thought is maybe we'll try to character assassinate the guy and see if we move the needle. I don't know. I wasn't expecting that to happen.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate
the second ethics thing that just came up, did you want me to talk about that too, or you want to wait later?
No, it's fair. I wanted to give you a chance.
Okay,
so go ahead. Then we'll get to some issues.
The second one that just came up is the biggest bunch of baloney that has ever been perpetrated out of the ethics board. Okay, let's think about this. I do a town hall meeting, or I do a series of town hall meetings, and one of my promises that I made to all the people in the district was that I would hold more of these than anybody, and I have. I've kept that promise since I was appointed in 2014. I have single-handedly held more in-district town hall meetings, been face-to-face with district people, letting them grill me for hours on end with whatever questions they want to, no holds barred, no restrictions, than any other representative or senator in the state. And so every session, there was one weekend carved out where it's guaranteed we will have no legislative floor action. They set that up early in the calendar, and the reason that they do that is the weekend that it's expected that we'll go out and hold a series of town hall events, and we don't have to worry about, well, is it going to be this weekend or this weekend? They carve it out early. This weekend this year it was February 22nd. So on February 22nd, I carved out over 10 hours of speaking time. It was over a 12-hour day. I started at 9 in the morning, and I went to where the people were. I went and started at 9 a.m. in the morning at the Gig Harbor City Chambers. I then went to the Port Orchard City Chambers. I then came to the Norm Dix building here at the Bremerton City Hall. And then down in the Key Pen, they don't have a city hall, but they have their civic center, so I booked it out there. So I started at 9 in the morning, ended at 9 at night. So if you subtract the travel time in between, 10 hours at least of talking. And now if you look at the way that most legislators attempt to do town halls and be accountable to the people, is they'll usually partner up with their buddies. They'll hold one of them, maybe two of them, and they'll maybe do an hour-and-a-half session. Well, each of them will take 15 to 20 minutes giving you an update. Well, heck, that's half the time right there, and then between the two of them, they answer 6 or 7, 10 questions, and they're done. Contrast that to what I do. I get up and I did 4 of these. They were each scheduled for 2 hours apiece, and I stay and I allocate time for personal Q&A afterwards if anybody wanted to follow up. And I get up and give between a 15-minute to a 25-minute, maybe half an hour if I'm long-winded during one of those, speech. And then the rest of the time, over an hour, is allocated to Q&A. No holds barred. And so I did that this time. So I'm going through those, and I have some volunteers come in. I have my mom volunteering at a welcome table. I have a local pastor from each of the 4 regions come in and do an invocation. I've been protested for doing that before. I have local veteran from each area come in and do the Pledge of Allegiance. And I have a local community member come in and do the MC. I mean, you could be the MC if you want to. It's nothing big. You just kind of hold the microphone. There's no big gambit other than I'm trying to involve the community. So I go and I do those, and during the course of those, my mom puts a flyer on the welcome table, an old flyer. Now, if you've been to campaign events, you know what campaign events are. There's a lot of glitz and glamour. There are remittance envelopes there asking for money. There are people getting up and asking for money. There are asks for votes. There are asks for volunteerism. It's all about trying to help that candidate get reelected. I didn't do that. That's what a campaign event is. This is a legislative town hall event, and on top of that, I filmed every minute of every meeting. Every minute of every meeting. So I have a campaign challenger in the primary, Naomi, comes to one of these events, sees that flyer there and goes click and sends it into the ethics board, and then they fine me $2,000. Well, they didn't fine me $2,000 just for that. They come in and they take that and then they blow this investigation up, which is another reason why you should look at the other one and see that they couldn't find anything to why that vindicates me. Because in this case, what did they do? They came back and said, well, Jesse, you had this flyer. Well, I didn't know it was there. I was in the front of the building. You can see it's all on tape. You want to know the first thing that the ethics board wouldn't do? They refused to watch the tape. I have all 10 hours on tape. You can have it if you want it. If you want to review it. I challenge you. Review it and see if you see me ask anybody a question for money. As a matter of fact, you know what you will see on that tape? Within the first 5 minutes of all 4 of them, I tell everybody this is a legislative event. I'm here. I show the difference. I have a PowerPoint projection. Everybody that asks about a bill, I pull up the bill. That's all I do for 2 hours. Being accountable to the people. Okay, so they say, well, she says you have this, but oh, Jesse, here's the problem. Yeah, your mom's a campaign operative. So the fact that she was there, we're going to fine you for that. But they don't stop there. Every one of those veterans that came in and did the Pledge of Allegiance, that's a campaign staffer. We're going to fine you and tack onto it for each one of those. Every one of those pastors that came, yeah, those are campaign operatives. We're going to tack on a fine for that.
Because they're not legislative aides.
Because they're not legislative aides. And then the same thing for the community leaders. And that's how I get a $2,000 fine. That's a bunch of baloney. And that's what that is. And they don't. And in the ethics board, not only will they not review the tape, if this is a real investigation, they should have reviewed the tape. They refuse to do it. Secondarily, if this was a real deal, well, I was going to make there's another point there. I think I'm doing pretty good. I'm going to call all that.
I appreciate you giving me a chance to do that.
Yeah, anyhow. Oh, they wouldn't mention in the document. They wouldn't mention. I have to rely on hopefully that you guys will mention that. They wouldn't acknowledge, as a statement of fact in the stipulation, they wouldn't acknowledge that the complainant was my primary challenger. Yeah. She was already filed back then. They should have mentioned that. That's a statement of fact. I think people would want to know that this is a primary challenger potentially looking to get a leg up on me. And so I think it's a bunch of garbage.
Appreciate your explanation. I wanted to give you a chance because people are bringing it up. Let's talk about some issues though. One of the things, obviously, we've been asking everybody about education, the next step after McCleary. You know, you guys did the property tax levy swap last year to make sure the funding was set there. You introduced, or you were co-sponsor on a bill, HB 3000.
Yep.
And I wanted you to explain, didn't make it out of the committee, but I assume it'll come back next spring. Tell us about what the idea is there and how you think it would work.
Well, honestly, thank you for asking. I guessed it right because you're the first one that's even brought it up. I appreciate it. Well, no, okay, let's come back to when I first came in, and I'll tell you the genesis behind the bill and what I think we should be doing with our revenue. When I sat in here and we had Nathan, it was a theoretical debate about what we should be doing with taxes. Your questions to us were, what are we going to do to get more revenue? And at the time you asked, are you guys willing to consider closing tax loopholes that aren't effective? Would you be supporting new taxes? And these are the discussions that we've had, and they typically fall along the lines of your traditional Republican versus Democrat talking points. Republicans don't want to raise taxes, Democrats are okay to do that, and then you get all the rhetoric that goes around with, you know, why that is. So, but if you boil it down, we were both making an advocacy for the same thing. We wanted to grow revenue. The Democrats' point was we wanted to grow it by raising taxes. Republicans were like, we want to grow it by keeping taxes low and letting the economy grow, which will net us more revenue. Well, because we've had a Republican Senate and we've had to compromise, we've not seen the taxes go up. But we have, for every quarter since I've been appointed, seen revenue grow and grow. Not just grow along what we expected it to grow exceedingly above that. And as a result, we've had more revenue than we expected. So when the governor came in at the beginning of this last session and said, hey, I need a couple more $1 billion to finally resolve McCleary, I want a carbon tax and I want a capital gains income tax to generate that revenue. We said, hold on. Well, first off, we don't want to go that route politically, but at the same time, the economy's growing, let's let it grow. Let's see if that produces our revenue. And what happened? We went into these extended sessions, and one of the unspoken things that was being done in those extended sessions was every new quarter that came back, we had new financial data. And by the time we got done with those extended sessions, the economy had produced naturally the revenue that the governor needed, and that's why the Democrats folded, and we got out without raising taxes, because the revenue was there. The governor said we needed this much, poof, there it is. Without raising taxes, it came. House Bill 3000 is a direct response to that. We now have solved McCleary. We solved it last year. And even after solving it, our revenue is continuing to exceed expectations. I think it's not unreasonable to want to give that back to property owners to help them stay in their homes. And that's the genesis of it. And I think you're going to see that be a push. I will certainly push it.
How would it work?
How would it work?
Yeah.
Well,
is it just a straight refund once we hit over a threshold?
No, well, we could do it by a threshold. I'm willing to sit down with any Democrat that wants to look at this and give real money back to the district. And I will consider any method that they want to choose to do it. I just think ultimately, that's the first salvo, a suggestion, if you will, that says, listen, we have more revenues, let's start giving it back. The truth of the matter is we can always find ways to spend it. But if we're going to talk about, if we want to transition, say, to homelessness issues or the lack of affordable housing, one of the things that we probably don't want to do is exacerbate the problem by putting people out in the street because their property taxes have gone up. And as a result of McCleary, property taxes did go up.
Well, yeah, that's exactly why I wanted to talk about this one. Yeah. Because another, a related question we've been asking everyone is, when you look at the rising cost of housing blowing up across the market, all of us are getting hit because my value went up. I mean, that's what's happening. And we have this age-old question of should we reform it? Should you have an income tax, a capital gains? I know you're against those things. Sure. But how does this create kind of a reform so it's not so dependent on property taxes in our state?
So, well, there's a couple different topics that I would touch for the all-inclusive package. Well, if you're going to address lowering the cost of housing or increasing the supply of it, which would allow the market to reduce the cost of it, well, then I would come in and advocate some changes to the GMA. If we do that and allow builders to come in with a little bit less regulation, they could start to immediately increase the supply. And if we start to increase this, I'm willing to, I've told you guys before, I'm willing to consider increasing the supply through tiny homes. I'd be willing to do it through manufactured homes. I just want to make it the supply greater. If you make the supply greater, the costs will come down. That's basic economics. And that will work. And we can affect that. Now, I don't necessarily think that we need to do a grandiose, big change in the GMA that might have a lot of Republican and Democrat talking points about environment and yada yada. What I would advocate for is allowing limited county opt-outs. We've started to do that over on the eastern side of the state, and it's worked well for those. I don't think it's the best course of action that Kitsap County would dictate its growth the exact same way that King County would. They're two separate entities altogether. Give Kitsap County some more regional flexibility with how they implement the GMA, and that will allow them to start working with the building industry, and that will allow them to start strategically growing at a faster pace, which will help bring down the costs. At the same time, I'd be willing to consider, I imagine there's an amalgamation, I can find a Democrat that would work with me on this, that would say, once we pass McCleary, I think county auditors had the benefit of two things. The economy finally started to rebound, they took a deep breath, off-year election for most of them, and they said, oh hey man, we just solved McCleary, and we know that taxes are going to come down again in 2019. So so if you look at the combination of the economy growing and the assessed values, they jacked up the assessed values. I'd be willing to put a moratorium on that.
Right here.
Yeah.
Where we're at right now.
Yeah. Why not put a moratorium on it and say, hey, quit, because you know what could happen? Next year, property taxes are going to come down as a result of the McCleary fix.
Right.
Okay? So, and then we did pass another bill that will help that even more. I don't want them to soak that up by jacking up your property values so much that you don't see the impact. So I'd be even willing to consider that. I'm open to all options on the table. I've heard other people suggest that. I'd be willing to consider that. So if you look at that and you look at addressing the supply side, I think that gives us flexibility to come back and say, you know what? If you look at the demographics of people that are on fixed incomes, holding on to their homes right now, we could probably help them out a little bit more and give a little bit of that additional revenue that comes in through a tax reduction on your property, and that's what House 3000 was attempting to do.
And kind of you could target it so it's the people who need it the most.
Sure, I'd be willing to do that.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
With the 1.3 billion, I think is the estimate right now, revenue increase for next year.
Is it?
Is it?
I've been a little busy running my campaign.
I could be wrong on what it was, but we know there's more money coming in. Obviously, not only education. You know, one of my questions was, what is next in education? What do you think didn't get solved? Even though McCleary says it's okay, we all know it may not be. There's different opinions on what exactly could be the next thing to fund. So I guess if you were to say this is the next priority to go after there, what would it be? Well,
I think we should come back and circle back around to one of the things that we did a couple of years ago, and that is reduce college tuition. I think that we desperately need to do that. I would also say that we need a broader based investment in CTE, or career and technical education. If we start to allow this notion that seems to have sunk in the legislature over the past couple decades that we need to steer everybody to a 4-year degree has hurt our kids. I would like to see that investment into greater opportunities and pathways for blue collar. Really, it's not really blue collar jobs anymore. If you think about it, it's a mixture. It's an amalgamation of blue collar and high tech. I mean, it's here. A nice easy phrase is the guy that swung the hammer before or turned the wrench is now programming the wrench before they turn it. Those are good jobs. In our industry, especially in the Puget Sound area, if you look at all the ancillary businesses that support the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard, if you look at the federal push to grow our Navy, that's going to be a huge boon. I would build a pilot program in this district, which is one of the things I'm working on, to address those needs and give kids opportunities to go in those fields.
At the K-12 level or the higher education level?
Well, I would go through. I'm sorry. I would start it at 7th grade, and I would start giving them opt-outs. So it would affect K-12. But why not build a pipeline that says let's start, if you're going to get into all the weeds of how many credits you got to have or which way you go with in terms of hours, let's give them another option that says you can start to peel off. You've got West Sound Tech, you've got all these curriculum-based programs that have some private partnerships with the school districts to say, hey, let's start letting these kids identify some base level things in middle school. And if they start to have an affinity for it, they can continue it on through high school and then have an easy handoff with custom-made curriculum that guarantees a job after a 2-year stint over at, say, Olympic College. Those are the avenues that I would start to pursue.
You introduced another bill that had to do with school assessments. Or you were, sorry, you didn't introduce it, you were a co-sponsor on it.
Yeah.
And my reading of it, it's a little dense, but my reading of it is this is a way to say, is it working? It's kind of focused on those graduation requirements and some things like that you're.
Well, believe it or not, now you know in the past I've had a WEA endorsement. I'm one of the few Republicans that's ever had a WEA endorsement. I've had a Low Income Housing Alliance endorsement multiple times. I've had the endorsement of the Retired Public Employees Union because I work heavily with those groups. I'm one of the few Republicans. Open door, come in. Let's get together. I don't care if you lean one way or the other. I really want to get solutions. So that bill was a WEA draft piece of legislation.
How do you think the best way is to use this bill to kind of, I assume what we're trying to do is say, yeah, our system's working or not.
Well, I don't want a top-down mandate. So the first thing that the bill does is it tries to remove some of the top-down mandates. It's arrogant for, in my opinion, for a part-time legislature to tell full-time teachers and professionals that are skilled in what they do how to do their job. Look, you guys seem like nice people, and I don't want you to tell me how to program. I know how to architect a system, and I do it really well, but I don't want you over my head. So why would I want to do that to teachers? I think that's an absurd stance to take. And I think it's only proven to have hurt our teachers' ability to not only teach our kids, but what about mentor our kids? What about invest a little extra time in Johnny because, you know, oh, I see he's a little depressed recently, or Jill over here is really soaring in this area. Let me give her a little bit more to help her grow even faster. Instead, they're sitting at night filling out reports because we've mandated them to death. And so whether it's mandates through the context of fill out these reports on kids, or in this case, mandates through testing assessments that say the legislature knows how to judge you better than your own superintendents and principals know how to do, I think that's absurd. So that was a pushback from that.
A piece of it, if I understand right, is taking away some of the, because we have graduation requirements. You have to complete this before getting that diploma. It's removing some of those.
Sure.
To say, no, they passed all these courses.
Yeah, you know what's funny?
That advances you out of high school.
Well, let's think about this. Did I need those to get into Notre Dame? No, I didn't have a graduation requirement. And you know what was my critique? Was getting accepted into Notre Dame. Notre Dame had its own graduation requirements. I didn't need that. When you guys graduate from school, you didn't have that. So why? And so if we just look at it from this standpoint, they put them in at some point. Let's do a compare before and after comparison. Is it better? It's not. It's only hurt our kids. So why are we doing it at all? I think that's a fair question that we need to start to answer. And the funny thing is, since I've been in the legislature, this issue on schools and how to regulate them or manage them has been a lesson in political science that I just would never have predicted. And the reason why is because it did not break down on Republican and Democrat lines at all. Our superintendent of public instruction, Chris Reichdahl, was in the legislature when I came in. And you had the chair of the education committee in the House was, I believe still, was Representative Santos at the time. And then our ranking member was Dahlquist, okay? They're running the committee, and at the time, if you remember, there was a big there was a big concern about whether or not we were going to lose all the federal money because behind No Child Left Behind Act, if we didn't produce this top-down mandate and put teacher scores as part of the assessment program, or ranking teachers according to how their kids pass these tests, if we didn't add that into the curriculum on teachers, then we were going to lose the federal subsidies. And so there's this huge debate, should we or shouldn't we? The WEA didn't want that, and I agreed with them. Okay, well, is the money worth it or not? Okay, well, ultimately, when you came down and looked at it, they brought forward the bill that leadership, the established leadership in both the House and, both the Republican Party and the Democrat Party, put forward, and it said, yes, we want to go down this route, except they couldn't get the votes to pass it. And it languished on the floor for days. Then all of a sudden, through the guys that I kind of have a better kinship more than with others, realized that there's a series of meetings being done by Chris Reichdahl and a couple of other conservatives on the other side that don't agree with that. And they basically go through, and the long story short is, they gutted that bill and said, okay, you guys are, Chris Reichdahl was pretty far on the left over here, these guys were pretty far on the right over here. And they go, what points do we agree on? Let's just list those down. And then after they listed those points, they said, you know what, if we can agree on that, we bet you the entire legislature would be forced to agree upon it. And so they carved out a bill around those points, and then they brought that back a day later after they carved out, got staff to draft it up, replaced the other bill, and that's what passed off in a day. That was a bipartisan piece of work that was not R&D differentiated. It was old guard, really, and new guard. And that's what you've seen. As more people come in, I think they're starting to push back against this old guard mentality of top-down mandates on teachers. And the WEA supports that. I've supported it. There was a natural alliance there, and that's the genesis of that bill, and that's really the main thrust behind it.
Using some of these influences, how are you going to measure whether we're meeting the state's responsibility for basic education in the years to come? What marker do you want to see? So you can say, yes, the money was well spent, we're doing it right.
Okay. Well, the marker that we used before was whether or not kids could get jobs. That's a great marker. I mean, let's look at it. They didn't have a marker to determine back when I was a kid.
Is there data behind that, though? Or
Well,
it's just kind of,
my data is I'm standing before you right now as a successful guy that's climbed out of poverty.
but there's one of you on the other side of the fence, too, probably.
Okay, fair enough. But let's ask it right now. Did the numbers get better after they implemented it? And at the end of the day, if you're going to ask me to pick in a system that has a lot of input to it, it's very complex and very convoluted. Okay, if you're going to ask me to pick between the different ideas that people are suggesting, I'm going to go with, if I have no other better data, I'm going to go with the experts. And in that case, the experts are the teachers and the principals that are out there doing this every single day. And that's why I've chosen the side of the WA.
One of them right here.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question on that. So, and you kind of touched on accountability of some sort, right? I'm not hearing.
Yeah, it's kind of what I mean.
I'm not hearing where what your, and kudos for you for being a success story.
Sure.
But that doesn't answer for me. So, what do you use for accountability? David mentioned data, and so what would be how would you quantify accountability? And the other part of that is, what is your philosophy? What would you do for the underrepresented populations? How would you deal with that issue, which is there's really a disproportionate amount of students who aren't making it? What about that group? What would you do with that?
So you were a principal? Is that what?
Not anymore.
But you were?
I was.
Okay. I think you're better qualified at running your school than I am.
Well, that's
So I would set a system in place that empowers you to make those determinations. And I would empower you with the budget, which is what we used to do. And I would look to you, I would look to the superintendents, I would look to all the principals, and I would come back and say, okay, let's take the shackles off you and you put the system on.
Okay, but given the role that I was in, okay, I have to report back to the community. I have to have some measurement. I have even in the classroom, you have to have some measurement of how kids are learning to read. What would you use? That's what I'm saying. And so you're saying less mandate from the state level. I get that.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm sitting there still wondering, okay, what will we use? And you might answer that, Peggy, or anybody else here. But what would that be? What would I use to report back to you as a legislature? Okay, you gave me that opportunity. Here are my results, and here's how I measured it.
Sure. Okay, so are you trying to get me to comment on Common Core or these types of things?
No, I'm just wondering in terms of,
we know that the dropout rate has increased in the sophomore year because of the Algebra 2 requirement, that the kids just can't get it and they have to have 3 years of math. So that's one data, that you could look at. So what are those kids doing now? They're going on to colleges.
So here's what
it's already there.
Yeah.
Here's what we know hasn't happened. You've had a top-down mandate come down from the federal government that says this is the one-size-fit-all that you have to implement. That's the wrong way. We know that. I've come up with a stance that says I agree with the teachers and that's the wrong way, and I'm going to stand on that. In terms of potentially falling into a trap of then saying, well, we're not going to abide by this top-down mandate from the federal level, but maybe we're smarter at the state level. And therefore, I'm going to institute another set of rules that says, I want you to measure reading success by 3rd grade this way. I'm not going to do that. That's arrogant. I'm going to ask you, or ask the WEA to come back and say, what is the best way to measure that? Okay, now I'm going to empower you through legislation. That's how I work, and that's why I've had the WEA endorsement, and that's why I've had a lot of advocacy groups in those areas really find it refreshing, and as a Republican, I've done that.
You signed on to a bill that had to do with school safety.
Yeah.
And that's a question Paul's been asking.
You mean, is this the bill I wrote? Is this like 3009, I think?
Yeah, with the security is able to have concealed weapons.
Yeah.
What is the WA opinion of that bill, and is it going to come up again in the spring? And kind of related, are there any other ideas towards making sure schools are safe, addressing school violence that you think are worth considering?
I'm trying to pull the number here real quick. It's not 9. Okay, 3007 is the bill.
Yeah.
And, okay, Important to note that I got a teacher to sign onto that bill and I got a police officer to sign onto that bill as co-sponsors. My point with that bill was when the school shooting happened down in Florida and we were dealing with all of this, you saw a lot of visceral response, and then you saw the partisanship come in and you saw all this back and forth. And so you'd have the governor stand up and say, well, we need to do this, or the attorney general would make a statement, and those were more D talking points. But then you saw Republican talking points of more guns, okay, armed teachers. And that rhetoric was only going to make it more divisive, and we weren't going to get anywhere. So what 3007 was, I said, you know what, I think I can, having been successful at that point, I'd already gotten the bridge fixed through. I think that I can be bold enough to go put out a real proposal that will get people talking. Here are the options that are potentially available for us. Armed teachers. I don't agree with that. And if you've read the bill, you know that it says you can't arm teachers. Okay? But I don't think that taking guns away, you know, from 18-year-olds or from adults, young adults, is going to solve that issue either. Okay? Now, or you could put a bump stock ban isn't going to stop somebody from walking into a school with a pistol, or even with a semi-automatic rifle. It's not, the bump stock ban is going to affect an accessory to a firearm is what it's going to do. That's not going to solve school shootings either. I want to address the issue of school shootings. So let's look at what the real options are. Well, we could do more armed security staff to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. And now we're going to have this huge budgetary debate. It wasn't going to get solved last year, and maybe that's what we'll end up going forward, and we're going to try to spend our way out of it. But even if you were to put 2 or 3 armed guards, if the state paid for 2 or 3 armed guards in every school, you're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars that we would need. Hundreds of millions. Just to get 2 or 3 armed guards that I'm not sure would fully satisfy the requirement. Okay, so that's one solution. Okay, but then I see Republican colleagues saying, let's arm teachers. There's a bill to arm teachers. Well, that doesn't represent my point. So I came up with a solution, and what this bill seeks to do is it seeks to put experts in what I believe, and I believe what most people believe, would be all the areas that we would want to put their heads together and make it non-political. That's why we had superintendents represented. Okay, that's why we had certain teachers represented. We had 2 different police agencies or advocacy groups, WACOPS and WASPEC represented. We had the National Guard represented, people that have dealt with active shooter responses. Okay, we also included NAMI. We had representatives from NAMI in there, the National Institute or Association of Mental Illness. Why? Because we want these people to come together along with some political appointees that we'll put in there. The governor could lead it. And I even tried to make a play to bipartisanship and even gave an olive branch to the Democrat Party, because I said, let's do a 4-corner appointment. You know, I think you know the 4, but you know, the House, Republicans, Democrats, yeah. Senate. Okay, so that means that you'll have 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats in the room, but then I let the governor make his appointment in there. The governor's Democrat. So that gives them a greater majority on the board too. The goal was, I knew that if we sit down and we start talking about either armed teachers or we start talking about hardcore gun restriction legislation, it's going to get mired, and we still have kids that are unsafe. So this said, let's put these people together and let's get them talking about the type of employee types. Let them identify which professionals in schools we might want to allow to concealed carry. And then that same group comes back and also tells us what type of training they would need to have in order for us to feel confident. Now, the reason why you would put police agencies in there is because part of that training needs to be the training that would be coordination. We know that the average response time is going to be between 5 and 8 minutes. Okay, maybe the strategy that they would come out with after working with the SWAT teams or with the different police advocacy groups would come back and say is, actually, we don't want you to physically engage to take them down. Maybe we want you to do this. And maybe the solution would be to pin in place. Maybe it would be to take down. Maybe that difference would be different depending upon the school district. If it's urban versus rural, if the campus is spread out versus dense. So this was an idea to get everybody talking, to say, let's get in there and let's let this group take out the politics of it, get these professionals in there and let them come back with a recommendation.
Would they be limited to that kind of the armed part of it, the training, or is it, can they consider counseling building security, physical improvements, and all stuff like that. That's all.
Oh yeah,
that's all within there.
Well, see, here's the best part. At the end of the day, some of the other solutions that we've looked at have been like, okay, do we shelter in place? That takes infrastructure costs. That might be a great way for the state to leverage its buying capacity to do that. This bill has virtually a zero fiscal note. Why? Because at the end of the day, we had one member that we wanted to come in and maybe be controversial, but I said I want the NRA in there. Why? Because the NRA could be the advocacy groups to the agencies that could potentially deliver this, get the costs down. Why? Because I want the people that ultimately would concealed carry, I want them to pay for it. Because I think that there's a lot of people that would pay for it. If it comes back and says we got to subsidize it in some way, then I'd be willing to consider that too.
What stopped this bill?
Well, we were late in session when the whole thing, when the whole thing started.
It'll come back?
I think it will. I think that, yeah.
What you're describing is what they do at Microsoft, the Microsoft think tank. That's it exactly.
But that's my background, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I was trying to leverage stuff that we've done in the private sector.
Yeah.
I think that it might have a better time next session because the politics will be removed and we won't be stressed for time. At the time, I mean, we were basically done with session and everybody was already making political points about it.
Are there any other questions you got? We're getting close to the end. We're talking a lot. I want to make sure I give you guys a chance. Anything that hasn't come up yet? Last thing, transportation. Because it's a committee that you're on. Obviously, the bridge has been a big thing. We don't have to talk about that anymore. But what's the next priority, and what is the most pressing thing to fix in the 26th district?
Okay,
right now for
so from transportation, the next thing I move on is starting to reduce the tolls, which I have plans to do. Secondarily, we've got the corridor study that's coming back. Okay, great. We also know that the Belfair bypass, I wish we had a map in here. Okay, so we know that we have the Belfair bypass that's coming. It's in the 35th, but I believe that directly impacts my district. The reason why is, if you want to see growth out in this area, whether it's at the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard, in which case you're going to have a Gorst bottleneck, or if you see growth out at the Port of Bremerton, at the airport down there, anything, which we have a lot of room to grow and attract a lot of businesses. Guess what? That's still bottlenecks in Gorst, because if you go south, even if you've built that small pipeline there through Belfair, if you go south, you're still stuck on Highway 3. And you can either divert over through Highway 302, which nobody's going to do. Okay, or you can continue down Highway 3, which nobody's going to do because it basically goes into street roads by the time you hit Shelton. So we need another bypass off, because the only alternative that they have to get out of Belfair or for any growth that we have is to go through Gorst, which is a bottleneck. Okay, so there were studies done. I had DOT give me an estimate back when I got in, and the estimate was, in order to fix the Gorst infrastructure, was at least $150 million. That's a big bite to try to get. That was about 5 years ago. So it's more like $200 million now. Well, the problem is most of the legislature is focused in King County. They don't want to give us that money. They've got all the 520 things that they want to do, or expand I-90, or you've got 405. So it's a hard thing, which is another testimony to, I think, how effective I was at working bipartisan, that I was able to get an $85 million basically gift to the district for the stopping or capping the tolls, right? Because I was able to get Seattle-based Democrats to give to a non-Democrat district in a non-King County district. So I think I've proven that I'm pretty effective at negotiating there and partnering with Democrats. So the grand fix is going to be, we need to relieve the Belfair bypass, and we need to create a link between the south end of that through to Highway 16. Now, you know what that does solve? It not only solves the bottleneck there and gives another relief valve to Gorst, but it also solves the problem on getting of Purdy and getting down into Highway or the Key Peninsula. Because if you look at the proposals that have been put in the past for Key Peninsula, the most cost-effective solutions are to go north a little bit, north just past the Kitsap County, Pierce County line into about where Pine Street is, and then you go, we've got land, it's easy to cut through, you've got already an arterial way that you could build into, you cut through there, put an interchange on Highway 16 there, and then you go west, and then you can cut back down into the Key Peninsula and tap into what Highway 302 is there, or you can keep going west through land and connect it to the Belfair bypass. That's what I'm now going to begin moving toward, because it solves multiple birds in one stone. It helps fix and relieve Gorst. It also helps to keep in.
What's the cost?
Well, the cost for the Pine Street style, there are 10 alternatives for fixing the Purdy spit. And I believe that one was 70 million.
Just the Pretty Spit part of it?
It'd be more than Pretty Spit. It would bypass Pretty Spit, so you get the interchange, and then you would come west, and then we get it all the way down, I think through 118th Street.
Okay.
Down in the KPN.
Okay.
No light rail?
No, light rail.